Hello, Morphy here. Today I'm going to be discussing creation and complexity. And I'm going to be using some clips from the Modern Day Debate channel, a channel which I really suggest that you check out if you haven't looked at it, because they've got some really good debates on there. I'm going to be using some clips from AronRa versus Don McLeroy. Don McLeroy is a young Earth creationist who was on the Texas State Education Board and had some influence on the science curriculum. Okay, well, we'll see how well that works out shortly. I've also got a clip from Professor Dave against Mr. Kent Hovind. Hope you enjoy.
They talk about, and they even interviewed me, and I was able to say, I think the new standards are wonderful. I said, and then it says, an evaluation of the sudden appearance of fossils and explanation of stasis in the fossil record is one of the things we got included. And also, I was excited about the fact that the students would learn about unguided natural processes trying to explain the complexity of the cell. Well, this lady, Eugenie Scott, who's real big in the evolution circles, and she's retired from the National Center for Science Education, she said, moderates on the board may have failed to recognize the final amendments as intelligent design talking points. So I think it's very important to remember that Science Magazine, one of the most reputable magazines in science in the world, had a story about what happened.
Now, why would Eugenie Scott say this? Oh, I've got it. Because these are intelligent design talking points. Complexity, complexity, complexity. Specified complexity, irreducible complexity. Complexity is something that intelligent design proponents go on about all of the time. Now, I'm going to come back to that a bit later. Now, as such, I don't have a problem with them having within the curriculum some of the things that are not generally understood at the moment. There are definitely gaps in our knowledge. Perhaps not so much to do with evolution by natural selection and how it explains the diversity of life on Earth. But certainly there are gaps in this type of thing where he's talking about cells and so on. He's going to go on about that a lot. It just seems to me that there's a very big drive on the points where they think they can poke holes. And at the end of the day, and this is pointed out several times, they're just using God of the gaps.
Forward. And then it listed the standards. So, which was it? Did we attack evolution? The most interesting thing is if creationists tried to insert creationism into any standard anywhere, guess what happens? They get struck down as unconstitutional because you can't teach creationism. Even though we had a majority to get some good, strong science standards, they were not creationists or intelligent design talking points, or the other side could have challenged them in court and said, oh, you're so. Then...
Now, I don't know whether it's unconstitutional or not, but the simple fact is, as far as the science classroom is concerned, you can't teach creationism because it isn't science. Perhaps if you could formulate it in a way so that it's falsifiable and so on, then perhaps we could do that. Especially with Mr. McLeroy's idea of young Earth creationism. He probably thinks, I don't know exactly, but he probably thinks that the Bible is literally true. So what we could do is set up a the Bible is literally true and see how falsifiable that is. Well, the Bible says that there's a firmament, so that the Earth's like a snow globe. Oh, no it isn't. So I falsified your position.
We're going to go back to Miller and Levine. Kenneth Miller, in 2014, and I gave a copy of this to Aaron. He can follow along with me. They had an assignment in their book that was adopted in 2014, and I was for all the textbooks to be adopted once these books came out, because at the time I said they'll have to explain the sudden appearance and stasis in the fossil record. They'll have to explain how the cell got its complexity. I said, this is great. That's all I want. That's all we wanted. Well, in Kenneth Miller and Levine's book, in 2014, Biology, it says they had an assignment, the history of life, and I have assignment for students to think critically and evaluate the evolutionary origin of ribosomes. And here's what they had in their book. Evaluate scientific explanations concerning the complexity of the cell, ribosomes, which are composed of RNA and proteins and are part of the complex structure of cells. One hypothesis proposes that the earliest cells may have produced proteins using RNA alone, and that ribosomal proteins were added gradually. Evaluate the proposed explanation of the evolutionary ribosomes based on the evidence that has been presented to support it.
So, what do we have here? We have a proposed hypothesis. Not a theory, a hypothesis. This is an area of ongoing research. But let's just say that we do come up with a mechanism by which this happened. Maybe not direct evidence, but a mechanism that actually works by naturalistic processes to get you from here to here. Isn't that going to be a better hypothesis than God did it? Because after all, we know that natural processes happen, but supernatural ones, we've got no evidence that those happen at all. And can I just say that these are high school students, not PhD candidates. Why are they looking so critically at areas of science that aren't known? Could it be that you're trying to highlight the gaps so that you can insert your God in there?
This is exactly, when I saw this in the Miller Levine book, I was ecstatic. This is exactly what, I can't wait to see if my prediction was that the evidence would be weak.
But of course, the evidence for your God, your particular God, is so strong. Excuse me just a second. According to this book, the evidence for your God is not so strong. And this is a peer-reviewed publication.
As you can see, here's a picture of the ribosomes in color that they had in their textbook. This is from their textbook. And in this, they said ribosomes consist of 4 ribosomal RNA molecules, more than 80 different proteins. The origin of this complex structure has long been a mystery. New research, however, has led to some surprising findings. Okay, here is the evidence that they give in the textbook for our Texas students. One of these is that part of the ribosome where the chemical bonds are formed between amino acids completely lacks proteins. This is true of other key places in the ribosome as well. So it's now clear that ribosomal RNA itself carries out the most important task in protein synthesis. How should we understand and evaluate this surprising fact? One interpretation supported by the evidence is that the earliest cells may have, they're hedging their bets, produced proteins using RNA alone. That over time, proteins were added to the RNA in ways that improved the efficiency of the process, leading to today's more complex ribosomes.
May have, they're hedging their bets. No, what they're being is honest. They don't have a real theory of this yet. They have hypotheses and they have possible interpretations of what's observed. And they're being honest about this. They're saying may have, they're not saying was that way. That's what you do. You're 100% certain that it's your God that did it. But you have no evidence to back that. It's just an assertion on your part. Well, I'm sorry, but the scientists are too honest to take that approach.
So, if you're a student, he said, let's tackle the assignment presented by Miller and Levine to evaluate proposed explanation for the evolution of ribosomes based on the evidence presented to support it. Well, what was the evidence they presented? They said, well, most of the action takes place with RNA molecules alone, but no proteins are involved. So here are some of the questions that could be asked. Are there any cells anywhere today that do not have proteins? No. Can you have life as we know it without proteins? No. Are there any proteins anywhere in the living cell today that was not made by a ribosome? No. Therefore, but if you have life today as we know it, but can you have life today as we know it without ribosomes? No.
We get it. You're trying to poke holes in things that aren't known. No, 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 no. But funny enough, Aaron said yes to the last bit. So maybe that is known. And maybe that's somewhere that you're wrong. And this is what happens with the God of the Gaps fallacy as well. It could well be that all of those things were no when he said them, but by now, some of them are yes.
Okay, that's where you get to respond in a second. Is there any pure RNA-only molecular machine that makes proteins today? No. Do they have evidence that it ever existed? No.
Do you have evidence that it didn't? Now let's just look at it from an evolutionary perspective. If in the past the hypothesis is that this was the situation, and we now know that this is the situation, then somewhere in between there may well have been a mutation or series of mutations that caused that change. And if the organisms that have that mutation are able to outcompete those that don't, surely it makes sense that those are the ones we see today. Now again, it's ongoing research, and I'm just spitballing here because I'm not an expert at all. However, that seems like it's feasible to me, whereas what you're suggesting has no evidence to back it whatsoever. This big cosmic hand, sort of Monty Python-esque, comes in and just fiddles with these things.
Would actual evidence of RNA-only ribosomes be better than speculating that the earliest cells may have produced RNA? So, how robust is the single surprising fact they provide, that ribosomal RNA carries out the most important task in protein synthesis? Does it explain the origin of the ribosome? No. Does it explain how it became incorporated with more than 80 different proteins? No. Does it explain the origin of the original 4 RNAs? No. Does it explain how they were formed? Does it explain how they were joined together? Does it explain how the messenger RNA with the coded instructions found them once they were joined together? Does it explain how they were able to reproduce themselves? No, no, no.
What part of ongoing research do you not actually get? These things are not known. But scientists are going to propose hypotheses. And those hypotheses from scientists can't be God did it. Because God did it is an explanation of nothing. And frankly, for God did it, you've got some explaining to do yourself. And I'll come to that towards the end of this video.
Were all the 80 proteins in the ribosome made by the ribosome? Yes, I guess that's what I would think. Do they know which of the 80 ribosomal proteins were added first, or second, or third, or so on? Can they add an extra protein today to further improve the efficiency of the process? No. Do they know the function of the ribosomal proteins? Is it a frame? Is it a support structure? A chassis? Can you make a support structure out of pure RNA? Can RNA without protein support itself and make another protein? They don't know. If not, how can you have a ribosome without a protein? And how can you have a protein without a ribosome?
Now, one of the things I'm going to say here is that it's worth you going and watching this debate. Remember, modern day debates in full. And I urge you to watch this opening statement once with the sound turned off and just watch Aaron. It's priceless. He starts by rolling his eyes and so on, and the facial expressions are just unbelievable. And now he's actually got bored with all these assertions and all these God of the Gaps fallacies, and he's probably texting his wife to talk about what they're having for the evening meal.
Consider an automobile. Can you say that the engine carries out the most important task? How plausible is it then to conclude that the engine gradually added a chassis that improved the efficiency of the process, leading to today's more complex automobile? Anyway, strange analogies that don't hold me too hard on those analogies. But bottom line is, there is a lot of complexity, and this picture that they have in their book is from what's called a prokaryote, or ribosome. which means it's the earliest cells before eukaryotes like us. Therefore, this goes way back. I checked to see what I could find, but ribosomes have been around for almost since life started. But they didn't start with the first cell, way too complex to have started on the very first cell, from my point of view. Therefore, evolution would then have to account for it, because evolution, it accounts for life changing after it got started. But anyway, so that's my challenge on the complexity of the cell. That's why I was excited to see how the textbooks would handle it. I predicted they wouldn't handle it very well, and to me it looks very weak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vic.
Okay, we get it. Complexity, 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 complexity. Now, you say the handling of the textbooks is very weak. I would say it's very honest. These are things that are not currently known, but we do have some hypotheses. And what they're doing is putting forward some of those hypotheses. That's what scientists would do. They would say, we don't know this yet, but here are some possibilities. Now, Aaron starts his response by pointing out that the debate was supposed to be about evolution versus creationism. And this guy has focused an awful lot on sort of abiogenesis type topics, which, as you're well aware, is not the same as evolution. They should have been discussing diversity of life and so on. But skipping forward a bit, Aaron makes a statement which worries me greatly, and I'll talk more about that after you've watched it.
Got active in it when I saw when a number of Christians were bragging to me about how their churches had all illegally voted as a lobby, exactly as their ministers had told them to do, in order to place certain judges and senators and school board members and so forth, in order to enact what they were calling a culture war that I was not even aware was going on. So what they wanted to do was to position all of these evangelical friendly judges and senators and so forth, so that when a trial would eventually come where somebody's going to challenge evolution, they would have the judges religiously biased, and that they would get what they want taught in school. They wanted to undermine not just evolution. Creationism is a rejection of evolution specifically, but more generally, it's undermining, or creationism is a rejection of methodological naturalism. They don't want to have things that can only be tested to be verified. They want to use magic, literally, the supernatural. Supernatural equals magic, magic equals miracle equals supernatural. They're all the same thing. So they wanted to have magic apply as a scientific explanation in science. And they wanted to challenge people's understanding of science because, and this was later revealed, but after this time, it was later revealed by the Discovery Institute in what they called the wedge document, the wedge strategy, was to cause people to question evolution, put out enough misinformation to mislead people so that they don't understand what evolution is, and then they can use the fallacy of the God of the gaps, which is, if you don't know that science has an explanation in it, therefore magic. So whatever we don't know, and he expressed this in his description, as all creationists do, you can't explain this, therefore magic, therefore God. So that is a completely dishonest position. And what really got to me was how they were misleading students in school. Now, it's one thing to lie to your own children. Sadly, you have a right to do that, but you should not ever be allowed to lie to other people's kids in a sequestered classroom where the teacher is supposed to be the authority and is supposed to be imparting the information.
So, it seems that education is being tinkered with by religious groups acting en bloc to make sure that they get people who share their views inserted on boards that can affect the curriculum. And also the judiciary, so that if people take them to court over what's in the curriculum, they'll win the cases. Now, this seems to me very, very dishonest, and it's the sort of dishonesty I've come to expect from theists. So why are they so keen to do this, to get this stuff into the school curriculum? Well, quite simply, what they're trying to do is just indoctrinate the kids with these ideas. But as we discussed, it's all God of the gaps, and Aaron even said that. It's all God of the gaps. It doesn't matter how many different things they come up with, it's all Complexity, 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 not understood, not understood, not understood, not understood. It is all God of the gaps. The problem with God of the gaps is the gaps get filled in. Just imagine the sort of things that they might have been discussing, putting on the curriculum 300 years ago, like lightning and thunder are sent by God. Okay, just before I give my closing thoughts for this particular video, there will be a part 2. I'm going to play a clip from, as I said at the beginning, Professor Dave against Mr. Kent Hovind. And it's just part of Dave's opening statement, which is just so brilliant that you must go and watch it in full. I'll give my thoughts after this.
Earth is consistent beyond reasonable doubt, as is agreed upon by literally all geologists, the people who study the Earth for a living. So when someone uneducated like Kent says anything to the contrary, it is totally baseless and can only be traced back to one piece of supposed evidence. Some book says a thing. Similarly, all biologists agree that evolution by natural selection is consistent beyond reasonable doubt. But Kent will say, some book says a thing. Kent also strangely proposes that many unrelated fields are somehow part of evolution. Most people would refuse to discuss these subjects in a debate on evolution. However, I'm very interested in demonstrating that Kent has no idea what he is talking about in virtually any academic field. So I'm going to permit the discussion of these topics, and I hope very much that he wishes to discuss them. In fact, let's introduce them now. Kent wants to know about what he calls cosmic evolution, which he thinks is the origin of time, space, and matter in a huge explosion. The Big Bang was actually the origin of space-time and energy, not matter, and it wasn't an explosion. Uneducated people like Kent imagine the Big Bang as fully formed planets and galaxies tumbling out of a kablooey graphic. This would indeed be quite absurd. In actuality, the model describes the universe arising from an initial singularity and then progressing through a series of epochs that require a lot of knowledge in particle physics to understand. Atoms took 380,000 years to form, and stars and galaxies took 150 million. There's overwhelming evidence to support all of this. 1, the recession velocities of galaxies and the expansion of the universe. 2, the cosmic microwave background radiation, a remnant of the recombination event predicted by the model and confirmed observation. 3, the ratio of hydrogen to helium that is predicted by the model and confirmed by observation. 4, hypothetical particles from early epochs that are confirmed in particle accelerators. Astronomers unanimously agree that this model is consistent beyond reasonable doubt. So when Kent begs to differ, once again, he can only respond with, some book says a thing.
Now that's the problem with this creationist model, especially the young Earth creationist model. All evidence is completely ignored, evidence that have been collected painstakingly over hundreds of years by scientists. And instead they refer back to the old Goat Herder's Guide to the Galaxy manual that they call the Bible. But I'm not even going to get into that on this part of the video. There'll be a part 2, and in that I'm going to be talking about faith schools and why I think that they should be illegal. But here's the point for this video. Complexity, 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 complexity. It seems that they're wanting all of these explanations for complexity, and don't get me wrong, the scientists are going to want those explanations too, and that's why these are areas of ongoing research. But what's the alternative proposed by the creationist? That God somehow poofed it all magically into existence. Well, this God that created everything also has a lot of characteristics which they infer from their old book. And even things that are not within that book. So they think that this God knows the number of hairs on everybody's head and such like. This God knows all of your thoughts, all of your deeds, follows all of your actions, created the universe, is obviously the greatest physicist and mathematician that ever existed in order to create this universe that we live in. This is a being of high complexity, much more complex than the first cell. And yet, this being that has all this complexity requires no explanation whatsoever. It just always existed. It itself did not need a creator to create that complexity. It didn't even need an evolutionary process to get to that level of complexity. It was just complex and always existed. Now explain that.